In a desert that swallowed names and erased footprints, she did not exist. And because she did not exist, the men lived. 700 meters above the kill zone, a woman who had no name steadied her rifle on flesh that would be dead in 4 seconds. The sun hammered the dunes white. 9 soldiers walked into an ambush they couldn't see. She saw everything. One breath. One choice. Pull the trigger or let them die. The shot that saved them would never be recorded, and the man it saved would spend 3 weeks trying to prove she was real. If you want to see how this story ends, stay with me until the final word. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels across the world. The desert didn't care about flags or uniforms or the 19-year-old kids who thought courage was enough. It took what it wanted. Water from skin, sight from eyes, life from the careless. First Lieutenant Mason Cole had been in Sector Orion for 97 days, and the only thing he'd learned for certain was that the sand remembered nothing and forgave less. His team moved in a staggered column across the basin floor, 9 shadows stretching long in the 1340-hour sun. The mission brief had been clean. Observe the abandoned Al-Rashid refinery complex, confirm no hostile presence, document structural integrity, extract before dusk. Command called it a routine reconnaissance. Mason called it what it was, a chance to get killed over a pile of rusted metal and broken pipeline. Jesus, it's hotter than yesterday, Private Adrian Vega muttered from Mason's 6 o'clock. The kid was 20, Denver-born, talked too much when he was nervous. How's that even possible? Physics, Corporal Liam Ross replied without turning. Liam was older, 32, former civil engineer who'd enlisted after his marriage collapsed. He carried a rangefinder like other men carried good luck charms. Thermal retention in silicate compounds. Sand holds heat longer than nobody asked for a TED Talk, Professor. Sergeant Dante Ruiz cut in, voice dry as the air. Ruiz was Mason's second, a lifer with scar tissue where his left eyebrow used to be, and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. Save the science lesson for when we're not walking through a shooting gallery. Mason raised a fist. The column stopped, silence except for wind and the creak of plate carriers. Mason scanned the ridgeline to the north, a jagged spine of limestone and basalt that ran parallel to their route for 3 clicks. Dark stone, deep shadows, 1,000 places to hide. His gut said something was wrong, but his gut had been saying that for 97 days. And Cole, you seen something? Ruiz asked quietly. Nothing, Mason admitted. That's the problem. They'd been on patrol for 6 hours. No contact, no radio chatter, no dust trails on the horizon, just empty desert and the refinery growing larger in the heat shimmer, its skeleton towers rising like the ribs of something long dead. Could just be a quiet day, Ruiz offered. Mason didn't believe in quiet days. Neither did Ruiz. But orders were orders, and the intelligence brief had sworn the sector was cold. Hostile activity concentrated 40 clicks west. Minimal risk. Standard op. We move, Mason decided. But tighten the intervals. 5 meters max, eyes on those ridges. The column compressed and pushed forward. What Mason didn't know, what he couldn't know, was that 700 meters above him and 20 degrees north, pressed flat against sun-scorched stone in a hide she'd occupied since 0400 hours, a woman with no name and no identification tracked his every step through a Schmidt and Bender scope. She'd been watching them since they left Forward Operating Base Chimera at dawn. Her spotting scope sat on a carbon fiber tripod, lens shaded by a desert tan ghillie drape that turned her into another shadow on the ridge. Her rifle, a custom point .300 Winchester Magnum with a 26-inch barrel and a suppressor that added another 8 inches, rested on a bipod she'd made from titanium and prayer. No mission patch on her shoulder, no name tape on her chest, no dog tags around her neck. The gear she carried didn't exist in any supply roster. The call sign she'd used 3 years ago had been scrubbed from every database that mattered. Officially, she had died in a helicopter crash over the Hindu Kush. 15 people attended her memorial service. Her mother received a folded flag and a pension. The woman on the ridge remembered that funeral the way some people remember dreams, distant, unreal, belonging to someone else. She exhaled slowly and checked her wind gauge. 3 knots from the west. Mirage was heavy, heat distortion bending the air into ribbons. She'd been hydrating every 30 minutes from a camelback bladder, pissing into a bottle she'd bury before she moved. 4 days in this position. 2 more patrols guided through without them ever knowing. 0 footprint, 0 compromise. That was the deal she'd made when they erased her. Invisible meant expendable. It also meant irreplaceable. Through the scope, she watched Mason's team reach the shallow water basin, a depression where runoff collected during the wet season, now just cracked mud and alkali stains. The soldiers slowed. Shoulders dropped fractionally. Someone laughed. The sound carried across the stillness like a stone dropped in a well. Amateurs, she thought, then corrected herself. Not amateurs, just young, tired, human. She scanned left and saw the problem. 600 meters south-southwest of Mason's position, a ripple of movement against the static dune line. Thermal shimmer that moved wrong, upward instead of lateral. She switched to thermal imaging monocular, a piece of tech that cost more than a new pickup truck. 3 heat signatures. Prone. Concealed behind a low berm. Her jaw tightened. She swept right. Found 2 more. Then another pair near the eastern approach. 7 hostiles. Interlocking fields of fire. Perfect ambush geometry. The water basin wasn't cover. It was the kill zone. Mason had just walked his people into a textbook L-shaped ambush, and he had maybe 60 seconds before the first shot turned the basin into an abattoir. She checked her data book, a weatherproof notebook filled with range cards, wind tables, and ballistic coefficients written in handwriting so small it looked like code. Range to primary target, 612 meters. Elevation, -17 degrees. Wind, corrected to 2 knots effective at target distance. Temperature, 118 Fahrenheit. Humidity, 11%. Her ammunition was hand-loaded, 190-grain Sierra Match King hollow points, muzzle velocity 2,950 feet per second. She knew the ballistics of this rifle better than she knew her own heartbeat. The lead hostile, a man in a sand-colored keffiyeh with an AMD-65 rifle, settled into firing position. She watched him adjust his cheek weld, watched his breathing slow. He was good, trained, patient. He was aiming at Adrian Vega's center mass. She made a decision in the space between seconds. The rifle came to her shoulder like an extension of her skeleton, cheek to stock, eye to scope. Breathing slowed to nothing. The reticle floated over the target. Not the man, but the weapon. She wanted chaos, not corpses. A dead insurgent was a martyr. A broken rifle was confusion. Wind pushed from her 4 o'clock. She adjusted half a mil-dot right. Squeezed. The suppressor coughed. A sound like a heavy book dropped on carpet. The recoil pushed into her shoulder, familiar as a heartbeat. 612 meters away, the AMD-65's receiver exploded in a spray of metal fragments and polymer shards. The hostile jerked backward, dropping the weapon, hands going to his face where shrapnel had opened his cheek. In the basin, Mason's head snapped up. "Weapons up!" he roared. The team reacted like they'd been shocked. Rifles rising, safeties clicking off, bodies spreading into a defensive perimeter. But there was nothing to shoot at. No muzzle flash, no visible threat, just the echo of something wrong bouncing off the ridges. "Where?" Ruiz demanded, scanning through his ACOG optic. "I got nothing." "Southwest? No, wait." Mason turned a full circle. "I don't—" The ambush was collapsing. The man with the destroyed rifle was scrambling backward, shouting in Arabic. The others were looking at each other, confusion breaking their coordination. On the ridge, she was already tracking the next problem. The Eastern team was adapting. A shooter in a gray dish dasha was repositioning, moving toward a flanking angle that would put him behind Mason's defensive line. She fired again. This time the round hit stone 2 inches from the man's head. Rock exploded like a grenade. The shooter threw himself flat, rifle clattering away, survival instinct overriding tactics. 2 shots, 2 ambush elements disrupted. But the clock was ticking. "Contact south!" someone in Mason's team yelled. "I don't see anything," Vega shouted back. "Then why the hell is someone shooting?" "Not at us." Mason grabbed his radio handset. "Chimera base, Reaper 1 actual, we have—" He stopped. What did he have? Unknown contact engaging unknown hostiles with unknown intent? Command would think he'd lost his mind. He released the handset. Liam, get your ass up that rise and tell me what you see. Everyone else covering positions. Nobody fires unless you have positive ID. Liam moved fast, keeping low, rifle up. He reached a slight elevation 30 meters north and dropped to a knee, glassing the area with his rangefinder. Jesus, Maze. I've got at least 5 individuals moving in the dunes, 600 meters out, maybe more. They're pulling back. Pulling back from what? Hell if I know, but something spooked them. Ruiz looked at Mason. Guardian angel? Don't start with that superstition bullshit, Mason said. But his hand was tight on his rifle, knuckles white. The woman on the ridge watched the ambush dissolve. The hostiles were retreating in disorder, discipline abandoned. One of them was still shouting, gesturing at the ridge where she lay. They'd seen the muzzle signature. Thermal bloom from the suppressor. They knew someone was up there, which meant her position was compromised. She had maybe 10 minutes before they organized a counter-sniper team. But Mason's patrol was still exposed, and the ridgeline to the north, the one they'd have to pass on their route back to base, was about to become a different kind of problem. She checked her thermal monocular again, and cursed silently. 4 new signatures, moving into position along the high ground. Not the original ambush team, a separate element, probably insurgents who'd heard the commotion and were moving to capitalize. Mason was boxed in and didn't know it. She reached for her radio, an encrypted multiband transceiver that officially didn't exist, and keyed the emergency frequency, then stopped. Protocol was silence, absolute. The moment she transmitted, a dozen signals intelligence systems would light up. Her position would be triangulated. Questions would be asked that had no good answers. She'd been erased for a reason. The mission was observation and interdiction, not direct action, not communication. But protocol didn't account for 9 men about to die. Her finger hovered over the transmit key. Chimera Base, this is Reaper 1 Actual. Mason's voice crackled through her radio scanner. Requesting immediate QRF to grid November Victor 742859. We have possible hostile contact, ambush indicators, unknown overwatch element, situation unclear. Recommend heavy support. The response was immediate. Reaper 1 Actual, Chimera Base. Negative on QRF. No available assets for possible contact. Assess threat level and continue mission or abort at your discretion. Advise when you have confirmed hostile intent. Mason's silence said everything. Copy Chimera Base. Reaper 1 continuing mission. On the ridge, the woman closed her eyes briefly. The quick reaction force was grounded. Budget cuts or competing priorities or some colonel's risk assessment that didn't include dying in a desert nobody cared about. Mason was alone. Except he wasn't. She opened her eyes and got back on the scope. The team was moving again, angling northeast toward the refinery. Good instinct, bad timing. The route would take them through a narrow defile between 2 rock formations, a natural choke point that was about to become a kill box. She tracked the 4 hostiles on the high ground. They were setting up a classic Overwatch position. L-shaped again, but tighter, meaner. 1 rifleman, 1 PKM machine gunner, 2 spotters with radios. They were coordinating. This wasn't opportunistic. This was planned. Someone had known Mason's route. The thought settled in her gut like cold iron. Intelligence leak, compromised communications, a local informant. It didn't matter which. What mattered was that in approximately 4 minutes, Liam Ross was going to walk point into that defile and catch a 7.62mm round between his shoulder blades. She ranged the lead hostile. 740 meters, wind now gusting to 5 knots, variable. Mirage was a nightmare, heat waves twisting her sight picture into abstract art. Long shot, difficult conditions, high risk of miss. But the alternative was letting Liam die. She dialed her elevation turret, clicked windage, settled her breathing. The lead hostile, a thin man with a PKM machine gun, was scanning through Soviet-era optics, waiting for Mason's team to enter the kill zone. She put the reticle on his head, then shifted. Not the man, the ground beside him. Create chaos, break the position. She fired. The round impacted stone 6 inches from the machine gunner's face. The rock disintegrated in a shower of fragments. The gunner screamed and rolled away, hands over his eyes, blood streaming from a dozen cuts. The other hostiles scattered like birds. In the defile below, Liam dropped flat. "Contact north!" "Where?" Mason was already moving, pulling his team into the cover of a broken wall. "Ridge! Shots from the fucking ridge!" But when Liam looked through his optic, there was nothing. Just stone and shadow and heat shimmer. "I don't have a target." "Then who the hell is shooting?" On the ridge, she was already packing. 60 seconds to collapse the hide. 90 to displace. 200 meters north to her fallback position. She moved with the efficiency of someone who'd done this 100 times. Rifle into a drag bag, scope covers on, camouflage netting rolled and stuffed, water bottles collected. Brass policed, every single casing, no trace left behind. She was gone before the echo of her last shot faded. Below, Mason was trying to make sense of chaos. "Listen up," he barked. "We've got unknown contact engaging unknown targets. Could be friendly, could be a setup. Either way, we're too exposed. We displace to the refinery, take cover, and figure this out from a defensive position." "Liam, you're on point. Dante, rear security. Move fast, move smart, and if anyone sees an actual goddamn target, you are cleared hot." They moved like a machine, training overriding confusion. Liam led them through the defile, rifle sweeping, every nerve screaming. No shots came. The refinery loomed ahead, a sprawl of corroded tanks and collapsed scaffolding, shadows deep and cool. They reached the perimeter and took positions inside a gutted control building, walls thick enough to stop small arms fire. Mason got on the radio again. "Chimera Base, Reaper 1, actual. We've reached Objective Tango, taking defensive positions. Advise. Multiple unknown contacts in AO. Pattern suggests we're being covered by unknown overwatch. Request guidance." There was a long pause. "Reaper 1 actual, Chimera Base. Say again? Unknown overwatch?" "Affirmative. Someone is engaging hostiles before they engage us. No visual contact, professional shots, long range." Another pause. Longer this time. Mason could almost hear the confusion on the other end. "Reaper 1, stand by." Ruiz looked at Mason. "They think you're crazy." "Probably." "Are you?" Mason stared out at the desert. "No." "Then what the hell is going on?" "I don't know," Mason said quietly, "but someone out there just saved our asses. Twice." From the shadows of the refinery, Vega spoke up. "Maybe it's one of ours. Special Forces. JSOC. Some spooky shit we're not cleared for." "Wrong sector," Liam said. "SF assets are west, near the Syrian border. We're nowhere near their operational area." "Then who?" No one had an answer. Outside, the wind was changing. Mason felt it shift, saw dust begin to lift in spirals. The sky to the west was darkening, not with night, but with sand. "Shit," Ruiz breathed. "Sandstorm." It came fast. Desert storms didn't build gradually. They arrived like violence, sudden and total. The wind went from 10 knots to 40 in under a minute. Visibility collapsed. The world turned brown and howling. Inside the refinery, the team pulled shemogs over their faces and hunkered down. Radio communication became static. GPS flickered and died. The storm swallowed everything. "How long?" someone shouted over the wind. "Could be an hour," Liam yelled back. "Could be 6. Mason checked his watch. 1,520 hours. They had maybe 4 hours of daylight left, assuming the storm cleared. If it didn't, they'd be spending the night in hostile territory with zero visibility and no support. He was calculating their options when the shots came. 3 rounds. Evenly spaced. Loud, even through the storm. Not close. Maybe 100 meters out, firing into open sand. "The hell was that?" Vega had his rifle up, aiming at nothing. Mason listened. 3 more shots. Same rhythm, same direction. It wasn't suppressive fire. It wasn't an attack. It was a pattern. "It's a signal," Mason said. "A signal?" Ruiz stared at him. "From who?" "From whoever's been watching us." "Saying what?" Mason thought hard. 3 shots. A warning? A direction? Then it clicked. The shots were coming from the southwest, the direction they'd entered from, and whoever was firing wanted them to hear it through the storm. "They're telling us to move," Mason said. "Northeast, away from here." Based on what? 3 random shots? Based on the fact that they've saved us twice already. Mason grabbed his pack. "We stay here. We're sitting ducks. Storm or no storm. If hostiles know we're in this building, they'll wait us out or move in under cover. We move now. We use the storm as concealment." Ruiz looked at the wall of sand outside. "That's insane." "Staying is suicide." They locked eyes. "Your call, Lieutenant," Ruiz said finally. Mason keyed his radio, knowing the transmission probably wouldn't make it through the storm, but trying anyway. "Chimera Base, Reaper 1 actual, displacing northeast under storm cover. We'll re-establish comms when able." Static answered. "All right," Mason said to his team. "We move as a unit. Tie off to each other if you have to. Nobody gets separated. Liam, you navigate. Dante, you're on me. We stop for nothing." They stepped into the storm. It was like stepping into a living thing. The sand didn't just blow. It attacked. It found every gap in clothing, every opening in gear. Breathing required a shamag pulled tight and short, shallow gasps. Goggles became useless in seconds, scratched opaque by flying grit. Liam used a compass and dead reckoning, counting paces, adjusting for wind drift. They moved in a tight file, each man's hand on the shoulder of the man ahead. After 30 minutes, Mason had no idea where they were. After an hour, he wasn't sure they were still moving in the right direction. After 90 minutes, the storm began to ease. Visibility crept back in stages. 5 meters, then 10, then 50. The wind dropped from a roar to a moan. The world rematerialized, unfamiliar and rearranged. Mason called a halt and pulled out his GPS. It flickered, acquired satellites, displayed their position. They were 2 kilometers northeast of the refinery, exactly where the shots had told them to go. And where the ambush would have been was now empty desert, tracks erased by the storm. "Jesus," Vega whispered. Ruiz just shook his head. Mason stared back toward the refinery, invisible now behind curtains of settling dust. "Whoever you are," he said quietly, "thank you." The desert gave no answer. By 1830 hours, they were back at FOB Chimera, exhausted, filthy, alive. Mason went straight to the TOC, the Tactical Operations Center, and found Captain Elena Ward, the intelligence officer, reviewing satellite feeds. "I need to file a report," Mason said. Ward looked up. "I heard you had an interesting day." "That's one word for it." He laid it out. The ambush indicators, the precision shots, the warning pattern in the storm, the survival. Ward listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "You're saying some individual operator protected your patrol without identification or communication?" "Yes, ma'am." "And you have no visual confirmation of this person?" "No, ma'am." "And no friendly assets were assigned to your sector?" "Correct." Ward pulled up a classified satellite feed. Thermal imaging from a Reaper drone that had been loitering over Sector Orion. She scrubbed through the timeline, matching it to Mason's report. There, at 13:42 hours, a thermal bloom on the northern ridge. Faint, suppressed weapons signature. Another at 13:47, and another at 14:03, but no human signature. Whoever it was had hidden their heat profile so well the drone couldn't resolve them. "That's not normal," Ward said softly. "No, ma'am." She looked at Mason. "This stays classified. Above my clearance, actually. I'll kick it up the chain, but don't expect answers. This kind of thing, people who operate like this don't exist in the system." "But they exist." "Maybe," Ward closed the file. "Or maybe you got very lucky, Lieutenant." Mason left the TOC and found his team in the chow hall, telling the story to anyone who'd listen. Ghost sniper, guardian angel, desert phantom. The myths were already growing. He didn't stop them. That night, lying on his rack in the plywood hooch he shared with Ruiz, Mason stared at the ceiling and replayed the day. "You think she's real?" Ruiz asked from the darkness. "She?" "Come on, the precision, the patience, the way she let us live instead of taking credit. That's not operator ego." That's something else. Mason thought about it. Yeah, I think she's real. You think we'll ever know who she is? No. Why? Because, Mason said quietly, if we knew, she'd be a target, and then she couldn't do what she does. Ruiz was silent for a while. Then, we owe her. Yeah. How do you repay someone who doesn't exist? Mason didn't have an answer. 70 kilometers away in a hide scraped into the slope of a nameless hill, the woman with no name cleaned her rifle by the light of a red lens headlamp. Her knees ached. Her eyes were bloodshot from 4 days of sun and dust. Her hands had blisters on the blisters. She didn't care. In 72 hours, another patrol would move through this sector. Different faces, same danger. She'd be there. She'd always be there. Because 3 years ago, when they asked her what she wanted most in the world, she'd said, to matter. And they'd said, then you have to disappear. So she had. The desert wind erased her footprints as she moved to her next position. The myths would grow. The men would survive. And she would remain a ghost, exactly as planned. The myths lasted 3 days before they became a problem. It started in the chow hall. Vega told the story to a logistics sergeant, who told it to a drone operator, who told it to a contractor, who put it on a message board. By the second day, half the base was talking about the ghost sniper. By the third day, someone had given her a call sign. Wraith. Mason hated it. He was in the TOC reviewing patrol routes when he heard 2 privates arguing near the coffee station. I'm telling you, it's a drone, one said. AI-guided precision strike system. Probably testing it out here before they roll it stateside. Drones don't fire warning shots, genius, the other replied. This was human. Someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Yeah, then why hasn't anyone seen them? Because they're a ghost, man. That's the whole point. Mason turned away before they saw him. The story was spreading like a virus, mutating with each retelling. Some versions had the sniper taking out 20 hostiles. Others claimed she could shoot through sandstorms using thermal vision. One particularly creative rumor insisted she was a local woman whose family had been killed by insurgents and now hunted them for revenge. The truth was simpler and stranger. Someone was out there, operating outside every protocol and chain of command, keeping soldiers alive without asking for anything in return. And command wanted it to stop. Mason was summoned to the battalion commander's office at 1400 hours. Lieutenant Colonel Victor Haynes was a West Point graduate with a squared-away uniform and eyes like a predator sizing up prey. He'd been in country for 6 weeks, long enough to hate the desert, but not long enough to understand it. Sit, Haynes said without preamble. Mason sat. Haynes slid a folder across his desk. This is your after-action report from 3 days ago. Want to walk me through it again? Sir, I documented everything that happened. Unknown Overwatch element engaged hostile forces, allowing my team to what, Lieutenant? Survive an ambush that may or may not have existed based on shots you can't confirm came from a friendly source? Mason's jaw tightened. Sir, with respect, I saw the results. Destroyed enemy weapon, disrupted firing positions, warning shots that gave us tactical advantage during a sandstorm. That's not coincidence. No, Haynes agreed. It's not. It's either a serious breach of operational security or a serious failure of situational awareness on your part. The words hit like a slap. Sir, do you know what your report implies? Haynes leaned forward. It implies that someone, some unidentified individual, is operating in my area of operations without authorization, without coordination, without oversight. Do you understand how that makes me look to Division, to CENTCOM? I understand that someone saved 9 lives, sir. You understand nothing. Haynes stood and walked to a map of Sector Orion pinned to the wall. Every patrol route, every mission timeline, every communication, all of it goes through this TOC. If there's an unknown element out there with access to our movements, that's either a catastrophic intelligence leak or you're chasing shadows because you got spooked in the desert. Mason felt heat rise in his chest. My team knows what we saw. Your team knows what you told them they saw, Haynes corrected. You're the officer. They follow your lead, and right now your lead is generating panic, rumors, and a breakdown in unit cohesion. That's not dismissed, Lieutenant. I'm putting you on stand down for 72 hours. You'll undergo a psyche eval before you take another team outside the wire. Mason stood slowly. Sir, you're making a mistake. What I'm making, Haynes said coldly, is sure that my officers don't lose their minds in the field. Get out. Mason left the office with his hands shaking, not from fear, from rage. Ruiz was waiting outside. One look at Mason's face told him everything. He's benching you? Psych eval, 72 hours. That's bullshit. That's the Army. Mason started walking toward the barracks, Ruiz keeping pace. He thinks I'm seeing things, or worse, that I'm covering for an intel leak. Are you? Mason stopped and stared at him. Ruiz raised his hands. I'm not saying I believe it. I'm saying that's what they're thinking. Someone knew our route. Someone knew where to be. And if it wasn't one of ours, then who? And how? It was the question Mason had been avoiding. They reached the barracks, a row of containerized housing units baking in the afternoon sun. Inside Mason's CHU, the air conditioning barely worked. He sat on his rack and put his head in his hands. What if Haynes is right? He said quietly. What if I'm putting pieces together that don't fit because I need them to fit? You're not, Ruiz said. I was there. We all were. Something happened. But what? And why? Ruiz didn't answer, because he didn't know either. That night, Mason couldn't sleep. He lay in the dark listening to the hum of generators and the distant thump of rotors as a Chinook landed on the helipad. Around 0200 hours, he gave up and went to the TOC. Captain Ward was there, alone, staring at a computer screen showing satellite imagery. Can't sleep either? She asked without looking up. Something like that. She gestured to a chair. Mason sat. I've been going through drone footage, Ward said. Every pass over Sector Orion for the past 2 weeks. Thermal, optical, infrared. You want to know what I found? What? Nothing. She pulled up a series of images. No heat signatures that don't belong. No movement patterns outside expected parameters. Whoever your guardian angel is, they're operating below every sensor threshold we have. That's impossible. That's what I thought. Ward zoomed in on one image, a ridge overlooking a patrol route. But then I found this. Mason leaned closer. The image showed terrain, rocks, shadows, nothing unusual. I don't see anything. Exactly, and that's the problem. Ward switched to a different filter. This is the same location 12 hours later. Watch. She played a time lapse. The shadows shifted with the sun. The rocks stayed static. Except for one spot, a depression near the ridgeline that seemed to change shape between frames. It's too subtle for automated analysis, Ward explained. But if you look manually, there's a variation, something that blends so well it's almost invisible, but not quite. A hide, Mason breathed. A very, very good hide. Ward closed the image. But here's the thing. I can't report this. Why not? Because the moment I do, this becomes a counterintelligence investigation. They'll flood the sector with surveillance assets, run biometric sweeps, interrogate every local national within 20 clicks. And whoever this person is, they'll either get caught or disappear. Isn't that the point? Ward looked at him directly. Is it? Someone out there is keeping our people alive. No demands, no communication, no compromise to operational security except for the fact that they exist. You want to shut that down? Mason thought about his team, about Vega's laugh, about Liam's steady hands on the rangefinder, about going home in a flag-draped box versus going home alive. No, he admitted. Neither do I. Ward stood. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to pass your psych eval. You're going to go back on patrol, and you're going to keep your eyes open. If this person is real, eventually they'll make contact or make a mistake. And when they do, we'll decide what happens next. And until then? Until then, Ward said quietly, we let the myths grow. Because scared soldiers are careful soldiers, and careful soldiers come home. Mason went back to his CHU. This time, he slept. The psych eval was scheduled for the following afternoon. The evaluator was a Navy psychiatrist named Lieutenant Commander Rachel Torres, a woman in her 40s with tired eyes and a voice that suggested she'd heard every kind of trauma story twice. Tell me about the patrol, she said. Mason told her, all of it. The ambush indicators, the precision shots, the storm, the survival. Torres took notes. And you believe someone was deliberately protecting your unit? Yes, ma'am. Why? Because the alternative is that we survived 3 separate lethal situations through coincidence, and I don't believe in that much luck. Luck is a statistical probability, Lieutenant. It happens. Not like this. Torres studied him. Are you under unusual stress? Sleep deprivation? Relationship problems back home? No more than anyone else here. Any history of hallucinations? Paranoia? No. Do you use any substances, prescription or otherwise, that might affect perception? Just Army coffee, ma'am, and not enough of it. Torres smiled slightly. Your physiological markers are normal. Your affect is appropriate. You don't present with any indicators of psychosis or dissociation. She closed her notebook. Personally, I think you experienced something unusual and are trying to make sense of it. That's not a mental health issue. That's being human. So I'm cleared? You're cleared. She stood. But Lieutenant, be careful. The military doesn't like unsolved mysteries. Keep asking questions, and eventually someone's going to give you an answer you don't want. Mason returned to duty the next morning. Haynes didn't acknowledge him. Ward gave him a brief nod. Ruiz clapped him on the shoulder and said, "Welcome back to the circus." The patrol rotation put Mason's team back in Sector Orion within 48 hours. Different route, different objective, same desert. They rolled out at 0600 hours, 9 men in 2 MRAPs, heading for a suspected weapons cache in an abandoned village 12 clicks north of FOB Chimera. Intelligence said the village had been empty for months. Intelligence also said Sector Orion was low risk. Mason trusted intelligence about as far as he could throw an MRAP. The village appeared on the horizon at 0740 hours, a cluster of mud brick buildings slowly being reclaimed by sand. They dismounted 200 meters out and approached on foot, spacing tight, weapons ready. Liam moved forward as point, using hand signals to direct the team through the outer perimeter. The buildings were collapsed or collapsing, roofs caved in, walls pocked with old bullet holes. Wind moaned through empty doorways. "This place is dead," Vega muttered. "Dead places still hide living threats," Ruiz replied. They cleared 3 buildings. Nothing. No weapons. No evidence of recent habitation, just broken furniture and sun-bleached debris. Mason was about to call it when Liam raised a fist from inside the 4th structure. Everyone froze. Liam backed out slowly, rifle up, eyes wide. He motioned Mason forward. Inside, the building was darker, cooler. Mason let his eyes adjust. Liam pointed to the floor, fresh boot prints in the dust. At least 4 people. Recent, maybe hours old. And in the corner, partially hidden under a tarp, something metallic gleamed. Mason approached carefully and lifted the tarp. Stinger missiles. American-made, still in their transport tubes. 6 of them. "Jesus Christ," he whispered. These weren't just weapons. These were man-portable air defense systems capable of taking down helicopters, drones, low-flying aircraft. If insurgents got their hands on these, Reaper 1 actual, this is Reaper 1 2, Ruiz's voice crackled in his earpiece. "We've got movement, east side. Multiple individuals displacing from the village perimeter." Mason keyed his radio. "Copy. Fall back to the MRAPs. We extract with the Stingers and..." The explosion cut him off. Not close. Maybe 300 meters, but loud enough to rattle his teeth. "IED!" someone shouted. Mason bolted outside. Smoke rising from the direction of the MRAPs. His stomach dropped. "Reaper 1-2. Status. We're intact. IED was remote detonated on our approach route. They're cutting us off." Mason's mind raced. The Stingers were the target. Someone had baited them here, waited for discovery, then triggered the IED to block their extraction route. This wasn't an ambush. This was a trap. "All elements, defensive positions. We hold here until..." Gunfire erupted from the east, then the north, overlapping fields of fire. The team scattered into cover, returning fire at muzzle flashes and shadows. "Contact east. Contact north. I can't get a clean shot." Mason pulled his team into a collapsed building with decent cover and limited approaches. They had maybe 10 minutes before the insurgents coordinated a final push. Chimera Base, Reaper 1 actual, Mason transmitted. Troops in contact, multiple hostiles. We are pinned down at grid November Victor 751234, requesting immediate air support and QRF. The response came fast. Reaper 1 actual, Chimera Base. QRF is 30 minutes out. Nearest air asset is 40 minutes. Can you hold? 30 minutes was a lifetime. We'll hold, Mason said, not believing it. Outside, the gunfire intensified. Rounds snapped overhead, impacted walls, threw up geysers of sand and pulverized brick. Ruiz looked at Mason. We're not getting out of this. Yes, we are. How? Mason didn't answer, because he didn't know. Then, from somewhere impossibly far away, a single shot cracked across the desert. One of the insurgent shooters jerked backward and went silent. Everyone stopped firing. Confusion rippled through both sides. Mason's radio squelched, not on the official frequency, on the emergency channel. A woman's voice. Calm. American. No call sign. Reaper 1 actual. Unknown station. You are surrounded by 9 hostiles. Recommend immediate displacement southwest. Covering fire will be provided. Acknowledge. Mason's heart hammered. He keyed the radio. Unknown station, Reaper 1 actual. Authenticate. Silence. Then, authentication is you're alive. Move now or stop being alive. Your choice. Another shot. Another hostile down. Ruiz stared at Mason. Is that? Move! Mason barked. Southwest! Go! 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 They ran. Behind them, precision fire erupted from the ridgeline. Not rapid, not wild, but methodical, surgical. Each shot forced the insurgents into cover or eliminated them outright. The team sprinted 200 meters before the return fire found them. Rounds whipped past. Vega stumbled but kept moving. Liam dragged him forward. The woman's voice came again. Hard left at the rock formation. 20 meters. Stay low. Mason didn't question. He turned left. A massive boulder provided cover. They collapsed behind it, gasping. Who the hell is that? Vega demanded. Does it matter? Ruiz shot back. More shots. Closer now. Mason risked a glance over the boulder. A figure moved among the insurgents, fast, professional, dismantling their formation like pulling threads from fabric. Mason caught a glimpse through heat shimmer, body armor, rifle, moving with the efficiency of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. Then she was gone. The radio. QRF inbound, 2 minutes, hold position. And suddenly the desert was quiet again. The quick reaction force arrived in a storm of dust and diesel, 4 MRAPs, 20 soldiers, a gunner on a .50 caliber sweeping for targets. There were none left to find. Mason's team was extracted. The Stinger missiles were secured. 3 insurgent bodies were recovered for identification. The rest had fled or been dragged away. Back at FOB Chimera, Mason was debriefed by Haynes personally. You're telling me, Haynes said slowly, that an unknown individual provided tactical support via unsecured radio and engaged multiple hostiles without authorization. Yes, sir. And you followed their instructions. They saved our lives, sir. Haynes's face turned red. They compromised operational security. They used a frequency that should be encrypted. They're the reason my team isn't in body bags right now. Mason's voice rose despite himself. With all due respect, sir, I don't care about protocols when the alternative is dying. The room went silent. Haynes stared at him for a long moment, then quietly, Get out. Mason left. He didn't care if he faced disciplinary action. He didn't care about his career. He cared that someone out there was fighting a war nobody acknowledged, protecting people who'd never know her name. That night, he stood outside his CHU and looked at the dark ridges beyond the wire. I know you're out there, he said to the empty desert, and I know you can hear me. So, thank you. The wind was the only answer, but somewhere in the darkness, 700 meters away, pressed flat against stone with a rifle across her chest, the woman with no name heard every word. And for the first time in 3 years, she smiled. She didn't smile often. The muscles in her face had forgotten how. But standing in the darkness with Mason's words still hanging in the air like smoke, she felt something crack open inside her chest. Not quite warmth, not quite pain, but something human that she'd buried so deep she'd forgotten it existed. Then her radio crackled. Not the emergency frequency, not the encrypted channel she used to monitor patrol movements. This was different. A burst transmission on a frequency she hadn't heard in 3 years. The frequency that meant someone at the highest levels knew exactly where she was and what she'd been doing. The voice was male, clipped, no identification. Autumn. Authenticate November 7 Delta Whiskey. Her breath stopped. Autumn wasn't a call sign, it was a kill switch. A recall code buried so deep in classified protocols that hearing it meant the world had just shifted on its axis. She keyed the radio with hands that wanted to shake but didn't. Authenticated. Standing by. You are compromised. RTB immediately. Authorization Omega Black. Return to base. Omega Black meant non-negotiable. It meant the mission, whatever invisible mission she'd been running for 3 years, was over. Negative, she transmitted. I have eyes on 3 active patrol routes in Sector Orion. Withdrawal now leaves them exposed. Sector Orion is no longer your concern. RTB or B declared hostile. You have 6 hours. The transmission cut. She sat motionless for 10 seconds. Then she began packing her hide with movements so automatic they bypassed thought. Rifle disassembled, optics wrapped, camouflage collapsed. Every piece of gear went into a pack that weighed 68 pounds and would carry her 70 kilometers across terrain that killed people for sport. She moved fast, not because she was afraid of the deadline, but because she knew what Omega Black meant. They were going to erase her again, this time permanently. The walk took 19 hours. No stops except to hydrate and adjust her route around 2 insurgent patrols that never saw her. She moved through the desert the way ghosts move through walls, present but intangible, there but not. By the time she reached the extraction point, a dried riverbed 30 clicks southwest of any marked installation, the sun was hammering the horizon and her legs were threatening mutiny. A black helicopter sat in the wadi, rotors still, no markings, no identification numbers. 2 men in civilian clothes and body armor stood beside it, rifles held casual but ready. She approached with her hands visible, weapons slung. Autumn? One of them asked. She didn't answer. The name felt like something that belonged to someone else. Get in. The flight lasted 90 minutes. No one spoke. She sat in the cargo bay with her pack between her knees and watched the desert scroll past below. Endless sand and stone and the tiny scars of human presence that the landscape would swallow in a decade. They landed at a compound she didn't recognize. High walls, razor wire, guard towers with thermal optics, the kind of place that didn't appear on maps. She was escorted through 3 security checkpoints, biometric scans at each, before being brought to a windowless room with a metal table and 2 chairs. And then she waited. Waiting was a skill she'd mastered. She sat without moving, breathing steady, mind blank. After 40 minutes, the door opened. The man who entered was in his 50s, gray at the temples, wearing a suit that cost more than most soldiers made in a month. He carried a folder, but didn't open it. Captain Sarah Vance, he said. It wasn't a question. She didn't react to the name. Captain Sarah Vance had died 3 years ago in a helicopter crash over Afghanistan. There had been a funeral, a headstone, a grief counselor assigned to her mother. You don't exist, the man continued. Your service record is sealed above top secret. Your fingerprints are flagged in every database as deceased. Your DNA is marked classified. For 3 years, you've been operating as an unacknowledged asset in one of the most dangerous sectors in theater. He sat down. And now you're a problem. Because I saved lives? Because you were seen. He opened the folder. Inside were surveillance photos. Grainy, thermal, long distance, her hide positions, her movement patterns. One image showed her silhouette against a ridgeline, rifle unmistakable. Satellite captured you 4 days ago. Analysts flagged it. Started asking questions. Questions led to your emergency radio transmission. That transmission was intercepted by 3 separate intelligence agencies. Do you understand what that means? She understood. It meant the invisible mission was over because invisibility had failed. Who am I speaking to? She asked. Someone who decides whether you continue breathing. He closed the folder. You were activated under Operation Wraith as a singleton Overwatch asset. No support, no extraction, no acknowledgement. Your job was to observe and interdict when necessary. You've done that job exceptionally well. Survival rates in Sector Orion are 23% higher than projections. That's your work. Then what's the problem? The problem is Lieutenant Mason Cole. The problem is his team talking. The problem is rumors spreading through every FOB in the region about a ghost sniper who protects American soldiers. The problem is that myths become investigations, and investigations become exposure. She said nothing. You have two options, the man said. Option 1, you disappear. Completely. New identity, new continent, new life. We pay you well, set you up comfortably, and you never speak of this again. Option 2, he paused. Option 2 is we make sure your original death becomes retroactively accurate. The threat landed like a stone in still water. And Sector Orion? She asked. The patrols? Not your concern. They'll die. Soldiers die. It's unfortunate but inevitable. She looked at him directly for the first time. Who are you? I'm the person who gave you this mission, and now I'm the person ending it. Something cold settled in her chest. This wasn't a debrief. It was a termination interview, and not the kind that ended with a pension. When do I leave? She asked. 72 hours. Use the time to decompress. There's a barracks on the east side. Food, shower, bed, things you haven't had in a while. He stood to leave. And if I refuse? He stopped at the door. Then option 2 becomes option only. He left without looking back. She sat alone in the room for another 20 minutes before someone escorted her to the barracks. It was clean, air-conditioned, almost comfortable. There was a cot with actual sheets, a bathroom with running water, a window with bars. She lay on the cot and stared at the ceiling. 72 hours. Then erasure or execution. Neither option included the ridgelines of Sector Orion. Neither option included the 9 men who were alive because she'd chosen to pull a trigger instead of letting fate decide. She closed her eyes and made a decision. Back at FOB Chimera, Mason was dealing with his own problems. Haynes had placed him under formal investigation for unauthorized communication with unknown elements. The charge was vague enough to mean anything, serious enough to wreck a career. He'd been confined to base, his sidearm confiscated, his team reassigned to other officers. Ruiz visited him in his CHU on the second day. This is bullshit, Ruiz said, sitting on the footlocker. You saved the team multiple times. I broke protocol, Mason replied. Doesn't matter that it worked. Since when does the Army punish success? Since success came from sources they can't control. Ruiz was quiet for a moment, then, Ward's been digging, off the books. She thinks whoever helped us is military, or was. What makes her say that? The shots, the tactics, the radio discipline? That's not some vigilante. That's training, serious training. Mason had thought the same thing. Any idea who? Ward hit a wall. Whatever records exist, they're classified beyond her clearance, but she did find something weird. Ruiz leaned forward. 3 years ago, a female Army captain disappeared during a classified op in Afghanistan. Official story is helicopter crash, no survivors. But the crash site was never fully documented, and the remains were identified through DNA that's now sealed. Ward thinks it's connected. That's a hell of a jump. Maybe. But the timing matches, the skill set matches. And if you wanted to create a ghost, killing someone officially is a good place to start. Mason felt pieces shifting in his head. If she's military, if she was military, then someone sent her. Someone's running her. Or was running her, until we screwed it up by noticing. The implication settled like lead. If she's compromised because of us, then she's in danger, Ruiz finished. And we don't even know where she is. Mason stood and paced the small room. We have to find her. How? We don't know her name, her face, her location. She could be anywhere. No. Mason stopped. She's close. She has to be. You don't run Overwatch from 1,000 miles away. She's in the region, probably within operational range of Sector Orion. Even if that's true, how do we... The lights went out. Not just in the CHU, across the entire base. Emergency generators kicked in after 3 seconds, bathing everything in red. The hell? Ruiz was already moving toward the door. Outside, chaos. Soldiers running toward defensive positions, officers shouting orders. The PA system crackled to life. All personnel, we have a security breach. Repeat, security breach. Lock down all sectors. Mason and Ruiz ran toward the TOC. They found Ward there, staring at a computer screen showing base security feeds. What happened? Mason demanded. Someone cut through the eastern perimeter fence, Ward said without looking away from the screen. Cameras went dark for 90 seconds. By the time they came back up, whoever it was had already penetrated the wire. Insurgent attack? No. Ward pointed at the screen. Watch. The security footage showed a figure moving through the shadows near the motor pool, fast, low, avoiding patrols with the precision of someone who knew exactly where they'd be. The figure reached a supply building, disappeared inside, emerged 30 seconds later with a pack, and vanished into the darkness beyond camera range. What did they take? Ruiz asked. Ward pulled up an inventory manifest. Medical supplies, MRES, water purification tablets, ammunition, survival gear, Mason breathed. Exactly. Ward looked at him. Whoever that was, they're preparing to disappear, long term. Mason's mind raced. Can you track them? Already lost them past the western perimeter, but Ward hesitated. Before the cameras went dark, I got a partial thermal image. She pulled up a new screen. The image was grainy, distorted, but unmistakable. A human silhouette, smaller than average, moving with the fluidity of someone who lived in combat zones. Female. It's her, Mason said. You don't know that. Yes, I do. He turned to Ward. She came here. Why? Maybe she needed supplies. No, she survived 3 years in the desert. She doesn't need our supplies. Mason stared at the frozen image. She came here because she's running. From someone. And she wanted us to know. That's insane. Is it? Mason pointed at the screen. She could have hit any of 24 supply depots within 50 clicks. Closer targets, less risky. But she came here, to our base, where she knew we'd see the footage. Ward frowned. You think she's asking for help? I think she's saying goodbye. Before anyone could respond, the TOC door burst open. Haynes stormed in, face red, eyes wild. Someone just penetrated my base, he roared. I want every soldier on the line. I want helicopters in the air. I want that infiltrator found and neutralized. Sir? Ward started. Now! The base erupted into action. Within minutes, patrols were mobilizing, drones were launching, thermal scans were sweeping the perimeter. But Mason knew they wouldn't find anything, because she didn't want to be found, unless she did. He grabbed Ruiz. Come on! Where? Where she's going. They took an MRAP without authorization, Ruiz driving, Mason navigating. They headed northeast toward Sector Orion, toward the ridge lines where she'd operated. This is insane, Ruiz muttered. Probably. We're a WOL. Haynes will have us court-martialed. Probably. And we don't even know if she's out here. She's out here, Mason said with certainty he couldn't explain. They drove for 90 minutes, leaving the marked routes, pushing into terrain that tried to swallow the vehicle. When the ridgeline came into view, the same ridgeline where she'd saved them twice, Mason told Ruiz to stop. They dismounted and climbed. The night was cold, stars so bright they hurt. Mason's legs burned, his lungs screamed, but he kept moving. At the top he found what he was looking for, a hide, recently abandoned, the depression in the rock still warm, empty brass casings collected in a small pile, evidence she'd been here, firing, protecting, and scratched into the stone with a knife tip, 3 words. Thank you. Move on. Mason stared at the message. She's gone, Ruiz said quietly from behind him. Yeah. For good? Mason touched the carved letters. They were fresh, hours old. I don't know. They stood there in the darkness, 2 soldiers on a ridgeline in the middle of nowhere, looking for a ghost who'd saved their lives and then disappeared into the same desert that had birthed her. We should go back, Ruiz said finally, before Haynes sends an execution squad. In a minute. Mason pulled out his radio, keyed the emergency frequency she'd used. Autumn, if you're listening, he paused. The name had come from nowhere, intuition or insanity. Thank you. For everything. I hope wherever you're going, it's somewhere safe. Somewhere you can stop fighting. You've earned it. He released the key. Static answered, but 70 kilometers away, lying flat on a ridge above a different valley, the woman who'd been called Autumn and Wraith, and a dozen other names, heard every word through the earpiece she hadn't yet discarded. Her finger hovered over the transmit button. She wanted to respond. Wanted to tell him that safe wasn't a place she'd ever see. That fighting was the only thing she knew how to do. That earning rest and achieving it were different things separated by classified orders and men in expensive suits. But protocol demanded silence, so she lowered her hand and kept moving toward a future that didn't include ridgelines or patrols or young soldiers who laughed too loud in the desert heat. Except the future had other plans. Because 3 hours later, as she was making her way toward an extraction point that would take her to option 1, disappearance, new life, silent exile, her radio crackled again. The same male voice from before, but different now. Urgent. Autumn, priority flash traffic. Sector Orion has been penetrated by a hostile force, estimated battalion strength. Multiple FOBs under coordinated attack. Casualty projections critical. You are reactivated. Immediate tactical authority. Authenticate and respond. She stopped walking. Battalion strength. Coordinated attack. That wasn't insurgents. That was invasion. Authenticate Tango 6 Romeo 9, the voice continued. This is not a drill. American forces are dying. You are the only asset in position to provide overwatch. Respond. Her hand went to the radio. 3 years of invisibility. 3 years of sacrifice. And now they wanted her back because the invisible mission had become an impossible one. She thought about Mason, about Ruiz, about Vega's laugh and Liam's steady hands. She thought about the carved message. Thank you. Move on. She'd meant it when she wrote it, but moving on required leaving people to die. And that was the one thing Sarah Vance, Captain, U.S. Army, officially deceased, had never learned how to do. She keyed the radio. Autumn authenticated Tango 6 Romeo 9. Repositioning for Overwatch. Send coordinates. Coordinates transmitted. Autumn. The voice paused. Welcome back. She didn't respond. Because she wasn't back. She'd never left. The desert wind erased her footprints as she turned north, toward the sound of distant gunfire, toward the ridgelines where men were dying and myths became real. Somewhere behind her, the safe future disappeared like smoke. Somewhere ahead, the impossible mission waited. And in between, Sarah Vance ran toward the fire instead of away from it, because that's what ghosts did when the living needed saving. The coordinates brought her to a ridge that overlooked 3 separate engagement zones. She could see muzzle flashes in the darkness like fireflies with violent intent. Tracer rounds arced across the sky. Explosions lit the desert in bursts of orange and white. FOB Chimera was under siege. She dropped her pack and assembled her rifle with movements faster than thought. Scope mounted. Bipod deployed. Ammunition check. Her hands were steady. They were always steady when the world was ending. Through the scope, the tactical picture emerged in fragments. Insurgent forces, better armed and organized than anything she'd seen in 3 years, had hit the base from multiple directions simultaneously. They weren't probing. They were overwhelming. The main gate was a charnel house, bodies in the wire, a burning MRAP blocking the entrance. Defenders firing from whatever cover they could find while hostile forces pressed forward with suppressing fire from PKM machine guns and RPG teams. She scanned for priority targets. Found one. A machine gunner directing fire from a hull-down position behind a wadi berm. Range, 890 meters. Wind, 4 knots quartering from the left. He was chewing through the defensive line, keeping heads down while other insurgents maneuvered closer. She fired. The gunner's head snapped back. The PKM went silent. She didn't wait to confirm, already tracking the next target. An RPG team setting up on the eastern approach. They had a clear line on the TOC, the Tactical Operations Center, where Ward and probably Haynes were coordinating the defense. Shot 2. The RPG gunner dropped. His loader scrambled for the weapon. Shot 3. The loader fell. Through her earpiece, she heard radio traffic exploding with confusion. Who's shooting? Unknown origin, northeast ridge. Are we taking fire or is someone helping us? I don't know, just keep your head down. She kept firing, methodical, mechanical. Each shot a calculus of range and wind, and the fragile line between life and death. An insurgent commander trying to rally his fighters. Down. A spotter directing mortar fire. Down. A flanking element creeping toward the fuel depot. Scattered. She was one rifle against a battalion. It shouldn't have mattered, but precision mattered. Fear mattered. The sudden realization that an invisible force was dismantling your attack from a direction you couldn't identify or suppress, that mattered. The assault began to falter. Inside FOB Chimera, Mason heard the distant crack of long-range fire and knew immediately what it meant. He'd come back to base 2 hours ago expecting court-martial or worse. Instead, he'd walked into a base-wide alert and been handed a rifle by a sergeant too busy to care about his legal status. Now he was on the defensive line with Ruiz, firing at shadows while the world tried to kill them. That's her, he said between shots. Ruiz didn't ask who. How do you know? Because the rhythm's the same, one shot, one kill, no wasted ammunition. Another enemy machine gun went silent in the distance. She can't hold them alone, Ruiz said. She's not alone. She's buying us time. Mason keyed his radio. All Reaper elements, focus fire on sectors where hostile suppression drops. Coordinate with Overwatch. Overwatch, someone replied. We don't have Overwatch. Yes, we do. Northeast Ridge, unknown friendly. Don't ask questions, just shoot where she creates openings. There was a pause, then, copy that. The defense started to synchronize. When Sarah's shots forced insurgents into cover, the base defenders pushed forward. When her fire eliminated key targets, infantry elements maneuvered to exploit the gaps. It wasn't perfect, but it was working. On the ridge, Sarah's shoulder was aching from recoil. She'd fired 43 rounds in 18 minutes. Her barrel was heating, her ammunition was finite, and the insurgent force was adapting, pulling back, dispersing, making themselves harder targets. Her radio crackled. Autumn, command net, air support inbound, 12 minutes. Can you hold? 12 minutes was forever. Affirmative, she transmitted. But I'm running low on ammunition. Need resupply or close air support sooner. Negative on resupply. Closest bird is the one bringing the hate. Hold what you have. She switched magazines. 15 rounds left in her current mag. 2 more full magazines in her chest rig. 60 rounds total to hold off an enemy force that numbered in the hundreds. The math didn't work. But math had never stopped her before. She shifted position slightly, moving 20 meters north to a secondary hide she'd identified earlier. The movement saved her life. Seconds after she displaced, mortar rounds impacted her previous position, turning the ridgeline into flying shrapnel and pulverized stone. They'd found her. She pressed flat as the barrage continued. 3 rounds, 5, 8. The insurgents were willing to burn ammunition to eliminate her because they understood what she represented, a force multiplier that turned their numerical advantage into a tactical nightmare. When the mortars stopped, she was already moving again. 30 meters west. Lower elevation, different angle. She settled behind a rock formation and got back on the scope. The insurgent force had used the mortar barrage to advance. They were inside 200 meters of the base perimeter now, close enough for grenades and small arms to be devastating, close enough for Sarah to run out of ammunition before she could stop them. Her radio. Autumn, status? Still operational, but they're inside my effective range for surgical fire. Recommend... An explosion cut her off. Not near her. Near the base. The fuel depot lit up like a sunrise, flames climbing into the night sky. Through the scope, she saw insurgents pouring through a breach in the western perimeter. They were inside the wire. This wasn't an attack anymore. It was an invasion. All stations, this is Chimera Actual. Haynes's voice came over the command net. We are being overrun. Fall back to inner perimeter. Defend the TOC and HQ building. This is not a drill. Sarah watched the base fragmenting into isolated pockets of resistance. She could see Ruiz and Mason's position. They were cut off from the main defensive line, pinned in a motor pool with maybe 6 other soldiers. No way out, no reinforcement coming. She made a decision that broke every protocol she'd ever followed. Reaper 1 Actual, this is Autumn. Authenticate for direct communication. Silence on the radio. Then Mason's voice, breathless. Autumn, Reaper 1 Actual. Authenticated. How? No time. You're cut off in the motor pool. Hostile force moving to your position from the south. Approximately 20 combatants. You have 90 seconds. We can't move. We're pinned. You don't move, you die. She was already ranging targets. I'll provide suppression. When you hear my fire, you run north toward the TOC. Do not stop. Do not engage. Just run. Acknowledge. A pause. Then, acknowledged. Waiting on your signal. She took a breath, let it out slowly. What she was about to do would expose her position completely, would burn through her remaining ammunition, would mark her as a combat participant rather than an observer, would end the invisible mission permanently. But Mason was down there, and Ruiz, and 7 other soldiers whose names she didn't know but whose lives mattered anyway. She started firing. Not precision shots this time, rapid fire, suppressive, forcing the advancing insurgents to dive for cover, disrupting their approach, creating chaos. Her radio, go, now! She saw Mason's team sprint from the motor pool, moving fast and low. Insurgents tried to track them, but her fire kept coming, methodical, relentless, pinning anyone who raised a weapon. Her bolt locked back on an empty magazine. She dropped it, loaded her second-to-last mag, kept firing. Mason's team reached the TOC perimeter. Friendly forces pulled them inside. Sarah's rifle ran dry again. Last magazine. 15 rounds. She loaded it and scanned for targets. Found one that made her blood freeze. An insurgent technical, a pickup truck with a heavy machine gun mounted in the bed, was racing toward the TOC. The gunner was already traversing his weapon toward the building's entrance where Mason had just disappeared. Range, 340 meters. Moving target. Poor angle. She led the truck's movement and fired. The round punched through the driver's windshield. The technical swerved violently and flipped, rolling 3 times before coming to rest on its side. The gunner was thrown clear, not moving. 11 rounds left. Her radio. Air support 90 seconds out. All stations, mark your positions and get down. She heard it before she saw it. The scream of jet engines. An A-10 Warthog coming in low and fast, its distinctive profile unmistakable against the stars. The pilot's voice. Chimera, this is Hog 1. I have eyes on multiple hostiles outside your wire. Danger close. Confirm? Confirmed, Haynes transmitted. You are cleared hot. The Warthog's GAU-8 Avenger cannon opened up with a sound like the world tearing in half. 30-millimeter rounds chewed through the insurgent positions, each burst sending up geysers of sand and shattered equipment. The enemy force broke. Not a tactical withdrawal. A rout. Survivors scattered into the desert, abandoning weapons, abandoning wounded, running for their lives. The Warthog made another pass. Then another. By the 3rd run, there was nothing left to shoot at except burning vehicles and silence. Chimera Hog 1, area secure. You're welcome. On the ridge, Sarah collapsed against the rock, breathing hard. Her hands were shaking now. The adrenaline was crashing, leaving exhaustion in its wake. She'd fired 68 rounds, killed or wounded at least 30 insurgents, saved Mason's team, held the line until air support arrived, and compromised herself completely. Her radio. Autumn Command Net, RTB immediately. You are ordered to report to Compound Sierra 7 within 6 hours, non-negotiable. She didn't respond, just sat there in the darkness, watching the base burn in the distance. She'd made her choice. Now she'd pay for it. Dawn came cold and gray. Sarah walked into Compound Sierra 7 with her rifle slung and her pack on her back. The guards at the gate didn't ask questions. They just scanned her biometrics and waved her through. The same man in the expensive suit was waiting in the same windowless room. Captain Vance, he said. No greeting, no preamble. She sat down across from him and said nothing. You were ordered to extract, he continued. You disobeyed. You engaged enemy forces in direct action. You communicated with ground elements. You exposed yourself to satellite surveillance, thermal imaging, and approximately 300 hostile combatants. He leaned forward. Do you have any idea what you've done? I saved a base, Sarah said flatly. You destroyed an operation 3 years in the making. You burned an asset that cost millions to create and position. I kept people alive, she cut him off. That was always the mission. That's the only mission that matters. The man stared at her. You don't understand what you were. I understand exactly what I was. A ghost, a tool, an expendable asset operating in a gray zone because command wanted plausible deniability. You were protection, he said quietly, for operations we couldn't acknowledge and soldiers we couldn't afford to lose. You were the balance between what we needed to do and what we could admit to doing. And now? Now you're exposed. The insurgent force reported you. Intercepted communications mention an American sniper operating outside the wire. Intelligence agencies in 4 countries are asking questions. You can't go back. I know. He studied her. You don't seem concerned. I'm not. Sarah met his eyes. Because I'm done being a ghost. What does that mean? It means you give me option 3. There is no option 3. Yes, there is. She leaned forward. You reactivate me. Full status. Acknowledged operator. I go where you send me, do what you tell me, but I do it with a name and a flag, and the understanding that I'm not disposable anymore. That's impossible. Is it? You just lost your invisible asset, but you still need someone who can do what I do. Someone with 3 years of field experience in the worst terrain in theater. Someone who just saved an entire FOB from being overrun. She paused. I'm not asking for retirement. I'm asking for recognition. And if you can't give me that, then option 2 is looking real appealing right now. The room went silent. The man pulled out his phone, sent a text, waited. After 2 minutes, the phone buzzed. He read the response, then looked at Sarah with something that might have been respect. Option 3 is approved, he said slowly. Under conditions. You maintain operational security. You never speak publicly about what you did. And you understand that the moment you become a liability, this conversation never happened. Understood. Welcome back to the living, Captain Vance. At FOB Chimera, Mason was in the TOC explaining for the 4th time why he'd taken orders from an unknown radio contact during a firefight. Haynes sat behind his desk, looking like he'd aged 10 years overnight. Ward stood against the wall, arms crossed, saying nothing. You endangered this entire base by trusting an unverified source, Haynes said. That source saved this entire base, Mason replied. If she hadn't provided Overwatch, we'd have been overrun before air support arrived. She. You keep saying she. Because it was. And you know this how? Mason hesitated. Then pulled out a piece of paper he'd been carrying since the battle ended. On it was written the authentication code Autumn had used on the radio. Below that, a name Ward had given him after running the code through every classified database she could access. Captain Sarah Vance, so, Mason said. Army sniper. Declared KYA 3 years ago in Afghanistan, except she wasn't. She was reassigned to a black operation nobody wants to talk about. Haynes went very still. Where did you get that name? Does it matter? She's real. She's been protecting patrols in Sector Orion for months, maybe years. And last night she came out of the shadows to save our asses. That information is classified above your clearance. Then court-martial me for knowing it, Mason said. But it doesn't change what happened. Before Haynes could respond, the TOC door opened. A Colonel Mason didn't recognize walked in, older, hard-eyed, wearing insignia that suggested he wasn't part of the normal chain of command. Lieutenant Colonel Haynes, the colonel said, I need your office, and Lieutenant Cole stays. Haynes opened his mouth to argue. One look at the colonel's face changed his mind. He left. Ward started to follow. You too, Captain Ward, the colonel said. This concerns you as well. She stopped, closed the door. The colonel sat down. I'm Colonel Marcus Hale, Joint Special Operations Command. I'm here to clean up a mess. That mess involves Captain Sarah Vance, Operation Wraith, and the fact that both of you know things you shouldn't. Sir, Mason began, I'm not here to threaten you, Lieutenant. I'm here to brief you, because as of 6 hours ago, Captain Vance was reactivated to acknowledge status. That means the invisible operation is over, and that means we need to control the narrative. Ward frowned. What narrative? The one where we explain how an American sniper saved FOB Chimera without admitting we'd been running unsanctioned Overwatch for 3 years. Hale pulled out a folder. Official story. Captain Vance was operating under classified orders as part of an experimental long-range reconnaissance program. Her actions last night were within operational parameters. Any rumors about ghost snipers or unauthorized assets are unfounded. That's a lie, Mason said. That's the truth we're releasing, Hale corrected. The real truth stays buried. But Captain Vance gets to come out of the shadows. She gets recognition, acknowledgement, and the thanks she deserves from soldiers who wouldn't be alive without her. Mason looked at Ward. She looked as stunned as he felt. She agreed to this? Ward asked. She negotiated it, Hale said, quite forcefully from what I'm told. Mason felt something loosen in his chest. Where is she now? That's classified, but she wanted me to tell you something. Hale pulled out a handwritten note. She said, "Tell Lieutenant Cole the desert doesn't keep secrets forever, and thank him for remembering that ghosts are just people who got lost." Mason took the note with hands that weren't quite steady. Will we see her again? He asked. Maybe, maybe not. Her operation is over. What happens next is up to her. Hale stood. But I can tell you this. Sector Orion's survival rate was 93% during her time there. That's not luck. That's one person deciding that anonymous heroism matters more than glory. He left without waiting for a response. Mason and Ward stood in the TOC, the note between them. 93%, Ward said quietly. How many lives is that? Hundreds, maybe more. Mason folded the note carefully and put it in his pocket. She saved us. All of us. And we never even knew her name. We know it now. Yeah, we do. Outside, the sun was rising over a base that was battered but standing. Soldiers were clearing rubble, treating wounded, accounting for the living and the dead. The survival rate would be calculated later. The after-action reports would be filed. The medals would be awarded. But Mason knew the real story, the one that wouldn't make the official record. Somewhere in the desert, a woman who'd been erased had written herself back into existence with 68 rounds, and the decision that being seen mattered more than being safe. And 9 men who should have died in an ambush 3 weeks ago were alive to tell about it. 3 days later, Sarah Vance stood in a different compound wearing a clean uniform with her rank insignia restored. Her name tape had been printed fresh. Her service record had been unsealed, partially, the parts that mattered. A general she'd never met pinned a medal to her chest. It wasn't the Medal of Honor. It wasn't even a silver star. It was a classified commendation that would never appear in public records, but would sit in a vault somewhere as proof that what she'd done had mattered. Captain Vance, the general said, your service in Operation Wraith resulted in the highest sustained survival rate in theater. Your actions during the defense of FOB Chimera prevented catastrophic loss of American lives. This nation owes you a debt it can never fully repay. I don't want payment, sir, Sarah said. I just want to do the job. You'll get that chance. New assignment, new mission, still classified, but acknowledged this time. No more shadows. Understood, sir. He saluted. She returned it. And for the first time in 3 years, the salute meant something beyond protocol. That night, she sat alone in her quarters and thought about the ridgeline, about the silence, about the weight of knowing people lived or died based on whether she pulled a trigger. She thought about Mason's voice on the radio, about Ruiz's steady presence, about young soldiers who laughed too loud because they didn't know how close death was walking beside them. She thought about the choice she'd made to step out of the shadows and the price she'd paid for it. And she realized the price was worth it, because somewhere in the desert, patrols were still moving, soldiers were still walking into danger, and the work was never finished. But now, when they looked for angels on the ridgelines, they'd know one had been there. And her name was Sarah Vance, and she was real. She was real. But real didn't mean free. The new assignment came 3 days after the medal ceremony. Sarah sat in a briefing room with 4 other operators, all male, all special forces, all looking at her like she was a tactical problem they hadn't been trained to solve. The mission briefer was a major from JSOC with a PowerPoint presentation and the enthusiasm of someone describing a funeral. Target is a high-value individual operating in the Kandahar province, he said, clicking to a slide showing a bearded man in his 40s. Intelligence suggests he's coordinating supply routes for multiple insurgent cells. Your team will insert via helicopter, establish overwatch, and provide precision fire support for a capture operation. Team? Sarah asked. The major looked at her. Yes, Captain. You'll be operating as part of a 5-person element, standard procedure for acknowledged operations. She felt something tighten in her chest. I work alone. You did work alone. Past tense. Your new operational status requires integration with existing units, chain of command, accountability. Accountability is why people get killed, Sarah said quietly. The room went silent. One of the Special Forces operators, a captain with a ranger tab and a scar bisecting his left eyebrow, leaned forward. You got a problem working with a team? I have a problem working with people who'll get in my way. Maybe we have a problem working with someone who thinks she's too good for backup. Sarah looked at him directly. I spent 3 years keeping people alive from positions nobody else could reach. I did it without support, without communication, without anyone knowing I existed. You think I need backup? I think you need to remember you're not invisible anymore, the captain replied. Which means you follow orders like the rest of us. Enough, the major cut in. Captain Vance, this is non-negotiable. You're part of the team, or you're out of the program. Your choice. Sarah stood and walked out without answering. She made it halfway across the compound before Colonel Hale caught up with her. Going somewhere, he asked, matching her pace. Anywhere but a briefing room where people treat me like a problem to manage instead of an asset to deploy. You are a problem, Hale said bluntly. A tactical problem. You're too good to waste but too independent to fit into standard command structures. That's what happens when you operate alone for 3 years. You forget how to be part of something larger than yourself. Sarah stopped walking. I never forgot. I chose it. There's a difference. Why? Because teams have rules. Rules create predictability. Predictability gets people killed. Hale studied her. Is that what happened in Afghanistan? Before you became a ghost? The question landed like a punch. Sarah's jaw tightened. That's classified. I have the clearance. Then you already know. I know the facts, Hale said. I don't know what you carry from it. Sarah looked away, toward the desert horizon. For a moment she was back in the Hindu Kush. Winter. Snow turning red. 5 soldiers in her unit dead because someone followed protocol instead of instinct. Because command said wait for air support, and air support came 20 minutes too late. She'd been the only survivor, the only one who'd ignored orders and taken a defensive position on high ground instead of staying with the convoy. They'd given her a Purple Heart and a classified reassignment. She'd taken the reassignment because living with the guilt in a normal unit would have destroyed her. I carry everyone I couldn't save, Sarah said finally. And I decided a long time ago that I'd rather work alone and save strangers than work with people and watch them die. Hale was quiet for a moment, then, what if I told you there's a way to do both? I'd say you're lying. I'm not. He pulled out a folder. New program. Small unit tactics with autonomous elements. You'd operate with a team but maintain independent authority for precision engagement. They handle close action. You handle overwatch. Everyone does what they're best at. That's just a team with extra steps. That's a team that understands you're not like them and doesn't try to make you be. Hale handed her the folder. Read it. Think about it. But understand this. You came out of the shadows because you wanted recognition. Recognition means responsibility. And responsibility means working with people, not just protecting them from a distance. He walked away, leaving Sarah holding the folder. She didn't open it for 2 days. Back at FOB Chimera, Mason was trying to process what normal looked like after the battle. The base had been rebuilt. The dead had been honored. The wounded had been evacuated. Life continued with the relentless momentum of military routine, but something had changed. Soldiers walked the perimeter differently now. They scanned the ridgelines with something between hope and reverence. They told stories about the ghost sniper who'd become real, embellishing details with each retelling until Sarah Vance became a legend who could shoot through sandstorms and see in the dark. Mason hated it. He was in the chow hall when Vega sat down across from him, tray loaded with food that looked like punishment. "You hear the latest?" Vega asked. "Someone said Captain Vance took out 50 insurgents during the battle. 50, with like 30 rounds." "It wasn't 50, Mason said. "How do you know?" "Because I was there, and she's human, not a superhero." Vega frowned. "You sound mad." "I'm not mad. I'm tired of people turning her into a myth when the reality is hard enough." "What reality?" Mason looked at him. "The reality that she spent 3 years alone in the desert keeping us alive and nobody knew. The reality that she came out of hiding to save us and lost everything she'd built in the process. The reality that we're sitting here eating terrible eggs while she's somewhere dealing with consequences we can't imagine." Vega was quiet. Then, "You think she regrets it?" "I don't know, but I think we owe her more than turning her into a story." That night, Mason wrote a letter. Not an official report, not a recommendation for commendation, just words on paper trying to articulate what it meant to be saved by someone who asked for nothing in return. He addressed it to Captain Sarah Vance, care of JSOC headquarters. He didn't know if she'd ever read it, but he needed to write it anyway. Sarah read the letter 3 weeks later in a barracks at Fort Bragg. She'd been there for 2 weeks, training with the new unit, learning to work with people again, learning to communicate in real time instead of through bullet trajectories, learning to trust that someone watching her 6 o'clock wasn't a liability, but an asset. It was harder than any mission she'd ever run. The letter was waiting on her bunk after a 20-hour field exercise. She opened it with hands that were blistered from carrying gear and firing thousands of practice rounds. Mason's handwriting was careful, precise. "Captain Vance, I don't know if you'll read this. I don't even know if you want to hear from the people you saved, but I'm writing anyway because silence feels like ingratitude. You kept my team alive. Not once. Multiple times. You did it without asking for thanks, without expecting recognition, without any guarantee it mattered. That kind of sacrifice is rare. The fact that you did it in silence makes it rarer. I've been thinking about what it means to be a soldier. We're trained to fight for each other, to never leave anyone behind, to be part of something larger than ourselves. But you operated outside all of that. You were the someone we never knew we needed, watching from places we couldn't reach. That must have been lonely. I hope wherever you are now, you're not alone anymore. I hope someone is watching your back the way you watched ours. And I hope you know that the stories we tell about you, exaggerated and mythologized as they are, come from a place of genuine gratitude. You saved us, and we will remember. Respectfully, Lieutenant Mason Cole." Sarah read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and put it in the pocket over her heart. She wasn't alone anymore. The new unit, 4 operators who'd stopped treating her like an outsider and started treating her like a specialist, had proven that teams could work if everyone understood their role. But Mason's words touched something deeper. The acknowledgement that what she'd done mattered, that the loneliness had been worth it. She pulled out a piece of paper and started writing back. The response took 20 minutes and 3 attempts to get right. "Lieutenant Cole, your letter reached me. I read it. Thank you. You asked if it was lonely. It was. But loneliness is the price of distance, and distance is what kept you alive. I'd make that trade again without hesitation. You also asked if I'm alone now. The answer is complicated. I'm working with people again. It's strange. It's difficult. But it's not lonely. There's a difference. The stories your soldiers tell aren't entirely accurate. I didn't take out 50 insurgents. I fired 68 rounds over the course of the battle. Not all of them were fatal, but they were all necessary. I'm writing to tell you something I couldn't say when I was in the shadows. You're a good officer. Your team survived not just because I was watching, but because you trained them well, led them smart, and trusted your instincts even when command told you otherwise. Keep doing that. Keep questioning. Keep protecting your people. And if you ever see someone on a ridgeline who doesn't belong there, don't assume they're a threat. Sometimes they're just someone trying to make sure you make it home. Respectfully, Captain Sarah Vance. She mailed the letter the next morning. 2 months later, Sarah deployed with her new unit to Syria. The mission was classified. The terrain was brutal. The enemy was well-trained and heavily armed. She worked overwatch while her team conducted close target reconnaissance. They communicated via encrypted radio. They coordinated fire. They trusted each other. It worked. Not perfectly. Not easily. But it worked. During a particularly difficult engagement, Sarah's spotter, a staff sergeant named Marcus Chen, who'd been skeptical of her at first, called out a target she hadn't seen. She took the shot. The threat was eliminated. The team extracted safely. Afterward, Chen looked at her and said, "Thanks for the save." "You called it," Sarah replied. "Yeah, but you made it. That's the difference." She realized then that working with people didn't mean giving up her edge. It meant multiplying it. The mission lasted 6 weeks. They returned to Fort Bragg with 0 casualties and a target list that had been systematically dismantled. The debrief was efficient. The after-action reports were filed. The team dispersed for 2 weeks of leave. Sarah went to visit her mother. It had been 3 years since the funeral. 3 years since she'd stood in a cemetery and watched a casket that didn't contain her body get lowered into the ground. 3 years since she'd chosen to become a ghost. Her mother lived in a small house in North Carolina. Retired nurse, widow, a woman who'd buried her only daughter and learned to live with grief. Sarah stood on the porch for 5 minutes before knocking. Her mother opened the door, looked at her, went pale. "Sarah?" "Hi, Mom." For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then her mother pulled her into a hug so tight, Sarah's ribs creaked. They sat in the kitchen. Sarah explained what she could: the classified operation, the fake death, the decision to come back from the shadows. Her mother listened without interrupting, hands wrapped around a coffee mug, tears running silently down her face. "Why didn't you tell me?" her mother asked finally. "I couldn't. It would have compromised the mission." "The mission," her mother's voice broke. "I buried you. I mourned you. I spent 3 years thinking you were dead." "I know. I'm sorry." "Sorry doesn't—" Her mother stopped, took a breath. "Are you safe now?" "As safe as I can be in this job." "That's not an answer." "It's the only answer I have." Her mother reached across the table and took Sarah's hand. "I'm angry at you. I'm furious. But I'm also grateful you're alive. Those two things can exist at the same time, right?" "Yeah," Sarah said quietly. "They can." They talked for hours, about the years Sarah had missed, about the grief her mother had carried, about the choice Sarah had made and whether it was worth it. "Do you regret it?" her mother asked as the sun was setting. Sarah thought about the ridgelines, about Mason's team, about the 68 rounds and the lives they'd saved. "No," she said. "I don't regret protecting people. But I regret the cost. I regret what it did to you." Her mother nodded slowly. "Then don't waste it. Don't let those 3 years be for nothing. Be the person you became out there, the one who saves people. But do it in the light this time. Do it where people can see you and thank you and know you're real." "I'm trying." "I know." Her mother squeezed her hand. "And I'm proud of you. Even when I'm angry, I'm proud." Sarah stayed for 3 days. They didn't resolve everything. Some wounds were too deep for quick healing, but they started the process. And that was enough. When Sarah returned to Fort Bragg, she found a package waiting. Inside was a photograph. Mason's team standing in front of FOB Chimera, holding a hand-painted sign that read, "Wraith Lives." There was a note attached. "Captain Vance, thought you'd want to see the people you saved. We're all still here, all still grateful. The myths are still growing, but we know the truth. You're not a ghost. You're a soldier who did the impossible. Thank you for letting us remember that. Lieutenant Cole." Sarah pinned the photograph to the wall of her quarters, looked at it every morning before she went to training. It reminded her why the sacrifice had been worth it. 6 months after the battle at FOB Chimera, Sarah received new orders. A promotion, a reassignment to a training command where she'd teach advanced long-range precision shooting to the next generation of snipers. It meant leaving operational status. It meant no more deployments. It meant trading the ridgelines for a classroom. She almost declined. Then she thought about the soldiers she could train, the lives they could save, the difference one person could make when given the right skills and the right purpose. She accepted. The first class she taught had 12 students, all experienced shooters, all skeptical that a woman barely older than them could teach them anything they didn't already know. She let them think that for about an hour. Then she took them to the range, Set up a target at 1,200 meters, wind gusting to 12 knots, temperature dropping, light fading. She fired one round. Center mass. The student stopped talking. Long-range precision shooting isn't about the rifle, Sarah said, lowering her weapon. It's about understanding that every shot has a consequence. Every decision you make on that trigger matters. Not just for you, for the people depending on you to make the right call. She spent the next 6 weeks teaching them everything she knew: ballistics, wind reading, range estimation, stalking, concealment. But more than technical skills, she taught them purpose. You're not here to become invisible, she told them on the last day of training. You're here to become indispensable, to be the person on the ridgeline who makes the difference between someone living or dying. That's not a ghost, that's a guardian. The class graduated with the highest marksmanship scores in the program's history, and Sarah finally understood what it meant to step out of the shadows, not to stop protecting people, but to multiply the protection by teaching others how to do it. 1 year after the battle, Mason returned to the States. His deployment was over. His team had survived. He'd been promoted to captain and reassigned to a staff position that sounded important and felt meaningless. He requested a meeting with Sarah before he took the new job. They met at a coffee shop near Fort Bragg. Neutral ground, civilian clothes. Two soldiers trying to remember what normal conversation felt like. "You look different," Mason said. "So do you," Sarah replied. "Less sand in your teeth. More paperwork in my soul." She smiled. It was easier now. The muscles remembered. They talked about Sector Orion, about Ruiz and Vega and Liam, all alive, all stateside, all carrying stories about a ghost who'd become real. "They still tell the myths," Mason said. "I tried to stop them, but it's impossible. You're a legend now. Legends aren't real people." That's what I keep telling them. Sarah looked out the window at a world that felt safer than the desert, but somehow less honest. "Do you ever miss it?" "The desert? Not even a little." "The clarity," Sarah clarified. "The simplicity of knowing exactly what mattered." Mason thought about it. "Yeah, every day. Out there, the mission was clear. Keep people alive, get home. Everything else was noise. Back here," he gestured vaguely, "everything is noise and nothing is clear." "That's why I'm teaching now," Sarah said. "So the next generation has the clarity I had to find the hard way." "You're good at it?" "I'm alive. That means I learned something worth passing on." They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Then Mason said, "I never thanked you properly. For saving us. For coming out of the shadows. For being real when we needed you to be. You wrote a letter. Letters are words. I wanted you to hear it in person. Thank you." Sarah met his eyes. "You would have done the same." "No," Mason said quietly. "I wouldn't have. I would have followed protocol, waited for orders, played it safe. You didn't, that's why we're alive. Or why I'm here instead of on a ridgeline. Is that a bad thing?" Sarah considered. "No, it's different, but not bad." They finished their coffee, exchanged contact information, promised to stay in touch the way soldiers always do, meaning it in the moment, uncertain if they'd follow through. As Mason stood to leave, he said, "The stories we tell about you aren't really about you, you know." "What are they about?" "Hope. The idea that even when we can't see help coming, it's still there, that someone is watching, that we're not as alone as we think. That's a lot of weight to put on one person. You carried it for 3 years. I think you can handle the myth a little longer." He left. Sarah sat alone with her empty coffee cup and thought about myths and reality and the space between where most people lived their lives. She'd been a ghost, then a legend. Now she was just a soldier trying to figure out what came after survival. The answer, she decided, was purpose. 3 years later, Sarah's students were deployed across 4 continents. They sent her updates when they could, brief messages acknowledging shots made, lives saved, missions completed. She kept every message in a folder labeled proof that it mattered. One message came from a staff sergeant who'd been in her second training class. He'd been on overwatch during a hostage rescue in East Africa, made a shot at 1,340 meters that eliminated a threat and saved 6 civilians. He wrote, "Captain Vance used everything you taught me, wind reading, patience, understanding that the shot mattered more than the credit. The hostages lived. Nobody knows I was there except my spotter. I thought you'd appreciate that. Sometimes the best work is still the invisible kind. Thank you for teaching me how to be a guardian instead of a ghost. Sarah read it 3 times. Then she wrote back, keep watching, keep protecting, keep being the person on the ridgeline. The world needs more guardians. I'm proud you're one of them. On a cool morning in October, Sarah stood on a ridge overlooking Fort Bragg's training range. Students were running drills below, stalking, concealment, precision fire. She watched them with the critical eye of someone who'd done this for real when the stakes were measured in heartbeats instead of scores. Colonel Hale walked up beside her. He'd been promoted to brigadier general, but still found time to check on the training programs he'd helped design. Your students are good, he said. They're adequate, Sarah replied. Good comes later, in the field. You ever miss it? The field? Sarah thought about ridgelines and sandstorms and the weight of a rifle after 4 days without moving. Sometimes, but I make a bigger difference here. Mathematics of force multiplication? Mathematics of not watching people die because they didn't know what I know. Hale nodded. For what it's worth, the invisible mission, Operation Wraith, has been officially acknowledged. Classified, but acknowledged. The survival rate data was presented to the Joint Chiefs. They're implementing similar programs in other theaters. More ghosts? More guardians, Hale corrected. People who operate with oversight this time. Supported, acknowledged. Learning from what you did right and what we did wrong. And what did we do wrong? We erased you instead of protecting you. We treated you like a tool instead of a soldier. We forgot that invisible doesn't mean invulnerable. He looked at her. But you reminded us, by refusing to stay invisible, by demanding to be real. Sarah watched her students. One of them, a young specialist with talent that reminded her of herself 10 years ago, made a perfect shot at 800 meters. The instructor called out the impact. The specialist's face lit up with satisfaction. They'll be ready, Sarah said, because you're making them ready. Because I'm teaching them that shots matter, and people matter more than missions. Hale was quiet for a moment. Then, you know, the myths about you are still circulating. Every FOB in theater has a version of the story. The ghost sniper, the guardian angel, Wraith. Myths are easier than reality. Maybe, but your reality is pretty impressive too. He handed her a folder. Recommendation for the Legion of Merit, for Operation Wraith. It'll be classified, but it'll be in your permanent record. Sarah opened the folder, read the citation. It was dry, bureaucratic, carefully worded to avoid operational details. It was also recognition that what she'd done had mattered. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me. You earned it the hard way. Hale started to leave, then paused. One more thing. Lieutenant Cole, Captain Cole now, he's being assigned to the Asymmetric Warfare Group. He specifically requested to work with graduates from your program. Why? Because he knows what good Overwatch looks like, and he wants to make sure his people have it. After Hale left, Sarah stood on the ridge watching the sun drop toward the horizon. The desert was 3,000 miles away. The ridgelines where she'd spent 3 years were occupied by someone else now, or no one at all. But the work continued. Different students, different threats, different wars. The same mission, keep people alive. That night, Sarah wrote in a journal she'd started keeping after she came out of the shadows. A record of thoughts she couldn't speak aloud. They want to know if it was worth it. The 3 years, the loneliness, the erasure. I tell them yes because that's what they need to hear. The truth is more complicated. It was worth it because people lived. Mason, Ruiz, Vega, Liam, hundreds of others whose names I never learned. It wasn't worth it because I lost 3 years of life I can't get back. 3 years of being human, of being known. But maybe that's the wrong calculation. Maybe the question isn't whether it was worth it to me. Maybe the question is whether it was necessary. And the answer to that is clear. Someone had to watch the ridgelines. Someone had to make the shots that kept soldiers alive. Someone had to be the invisible force that tipped fate in favor of survival. I was that someone. And now I'm teaching others to be that someone too. So yes, it was worth it. Not because I wanted it, but because it needed to be done. And I was the one willing to do it. She closed the journal and looked out the window at a base settling into darkness. Lights coming on in barracks, soldiers finishing their day. Life continuing with the casual certainty of people who didn't know how close death walked beside them every day. But Sarah knew. And because she knew, she taught. And because she taught, others would watch the ridgelines when she couldn't. The desert would keep its secrets. The myths would grow. And somewhere, on a ridge above a patrol route, in a country most people couldn't find on a map, a soldier she'd trained would make a shot that saved a life. And that soldier would remember the instructor who'd taught them that true strength isn't always seen. Sometimes it's the silence that saves you. Sarah Vance had been a ghost, then a legend. Now she was something more important. She was a teacher of guardians, and the work would never be finished, but it would always matter. Sometimes the greatest courage isn't in being seen, it's in choosing to be invisible so others can live in the light.